Take a look at this home in Beaufort, Georgia. It's a 4-bedroom, 2.5 bath at just under 1,800 square feet. Right now, it's listed for $400,000, just below Georgia's median home price. 10 years ago, this same house was $161,000. That's an increase of 146% in just a decade. In that same time span, individual incomes in Georgia have only increased by 59%. This is a massive gap. But wait, that's just one house, right? Well, actually, this house matches the state's average home percentage increase in that time frame. This reflects a deeper issue happening across Georgia. Prices are surging, and affordability is slipping away from many families. Over the past few years, families across the state have faced rising costs, fewer options, and a growing sense of frustration. Elected officials that wish to do something about it often hear repeated concerns. They hear things like, "That new neighborhood will change our community. These new homes are being built to rent. Any existing home that I can afford is being bought by Wall Street and rented above what I can pay." But here's the thing. The biggest reasons for this are, surprisingly, not Wall Street investors or people refusing to sell their homes. The real culprit is something much more systemic. Let's dive in. First, let's tackle some common myths. It's tempting to blame rising housing prices on corporate greed, but studies show that while large investors play a role in the market, their impact is minimal compared to the real issue: supply and demand. While the demand for housing in Georgia has been steadily increasing as our state's population has risen, the necessary supply has not been met. Georgia has continuously added 1 million new residents per decade since 1980, and we're already on pace to do that again in the 2020s. In other words, we just aren't building enough houses. Then there's rent control. While it might sound like a quick fix for rising costs, it's a policy that backfires. Rent control discourages developers from building new housing, shrinking the supply even further. What about subsidies? Well, they're a short-term band-aid at best, but they ultimately push prices even higher by increasing demand without addressing the root of the problem. So why aren't we building enough houses? One word: regulation. As it turns out, the biggest barrier to affordable housing in Georgia is excessive regulations. How do these regulations actually work in practice? Well, let's examine a few. First, take zoning laws. Many cities in Georgia are dominated by single-family zoning. That means that by law, many large swaths of land can only be used to build detached houses, which limits the number of homes available. Next, the permitting process. It's not uncommon for new developments to be delayed by months or even years due to bureaucratic red tape. This adds costs for developers, costs which are ultimately passed down to buyers and renters. And then there are land use restrictions. These rules make it harder to build the types of housing Georgia desperately needs, like townhomes, apartments, and mixed-use developments. These are just a few examples of the many regulations that undermine affordable housing in Georgia. But it doesn't have to be this way. Other states have shown that when you loosen these restrictions, it can lead to real change. For example, states that have reformed their zoning laws and streamlined permitting processes have seen housing markets stabilize and costs decline. Georgia can follow suit by focusing on increasing the supply of homes, not restricting it. Simplifying zoning rules to allow for more types of housing, speeding up permitting timelines, and reducing land use regulations are steps that can make housing more accessible for everyone. The good news is that the housing affordability crisis in Georgia isn't inevitable. It's the result of policy choices that we have the power to change. By addressing the real causes of rising prices, we can create a future where more people have access to a home they can afford.